I'm Steve Grossman, CEO of ICIC, the Initiative for a Competitive Intercity, and I welcome all of you to today's webinar, Racial Equity in America's New Industrial Transformation. Through ICIC's pioneering research, we've known for a long time of the shockingly low representation of Black and Hispanic-owned businesses in some of our major industries, including real estate development and now manufacturing. Changing that dynamic, changing that reality is central to the future of American competitiveness. ICIC's mission and vision include the creation of generational wealth, particularly for those who have been left out and left behind for so long, as well as narrowing this country's racial wealth gap. Addressing these challenges and opportunities afforded us through recently passed federal legislation is the topic of today's webinar, which we hope will be the catalyst for critical conversations and actionable steps in the months and years ahead. A lot of thank yous in order to make this a successful day in this important conversation. So let me start with thanking Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents the 17th District of California. Ro's been my dear friend for many, many years, and he is an architect of the new industrial transformation and policies designed to accomplish that goal. I want to thank Ying McGuire, CEO and President of NMSDC, the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And I want to note that Ying and her colleagues have been instrumental in providing us critical data that went into this report. I think it's fair to say that our research team could not have done it without the help of NMSDC. I want to thank the moderator of our roundtable discussion, Susan Helper, Carlton Professor of Economics at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, and former Senior Advisor for Industrial Strategy at the White House Office of Management and Budget, commonly known as OMB. I also want to express my appreciation to our Research Director and his team, Dr. Howard Wial, Miles Chandler, and Peter Eberhardt. You'll have an opportunity to learn more about it in just a few minutes. And finally, to my colleagues who are such rock stars in marketing and communications, Sarah Ganand, our Director of Marketing and Communications, and her colleague Jasmine Martin, Manager of Marketing and Communications at ICIC. So we're going to hear first from Congressman Khanna, followed by Ying McGuire with their introductory remarks. They'll be followed by a presentation from ICIC's Research Director, Howard Wial, on the essence of the research we've done and some timely recommendations to help transform the landscape across the country when it comes to the new industrial transformation. Finally, we'll have a roundtable discussion, which will include Ro, Ying, and Susan Helper, who will facilitate and be our moderator, followed by questions and answers from the audience. So write down your questions, send them to us in the chat. We look forward to a wonderful, wonderful dialogue. I want to thank the attendees who are taking time out of their busy schedules. And now please welcome Congressman Ro Khanna.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you to ICIC for the groundbreaking report. And thank you to you for your incredible leadership for decades about helping address the income divide, the opportunity divide, and the wealth divide. I am so honored to participate, and I'm so gratified and excited at the attendance at this webinar. I thought we'd have maybe 10 people to talk about such a arcane policy issue, and I'm really delighted that we have the turnout. So thank you for taking the time on a Monday. Let me start with what a mentor of mine, Andy Grove, said. Andy Grove, for those of you who aren't familiar, is one of the great entrepreneurs, American entrepreneurs. He helped found Intel. And one of his core philosophies, his core principles was, if you don't measure something, you'll never achieve it. And I think what ICIC has done with this report is taken a very important first step, and that is to actually measure and understand the divide that we have in our new industrial policy. To articulate that you have an African-American community that is almost 14% of the population, but only 1% of manufacturing businesses. That you have a Latino population, almost 20%, but only 5% businesses, and then to actually help by identifying all of the businesses that could be part of the supply chain that are Latino and African American. This is an extraordinary contribution because we're finally measuring something and have some metric which we can measure ourselves with. If we weren't doing that, we're never going to be able to overcome this divide. Now, why does it matter? I often say that we will never overcome the racial wealth gap in this country, 10-to-1, without overcoming the racial wealth generation gap. We have to have more opportunities to build wealth in communities that have been excluded from the modern economy. I represent a district that has $14 trillion of market value. NVIDIA, Apple, Google, Tesla, all in my district. Almost 30% of the S&P 500 in one congressional district. But as this wealth has accumulated in places like Silicon Valley and New York, too many parts of the country and too many communities have been left out of modern wealth generation. I can't help but think that some of the division, some of the grievance, some of the anger, some of the bitterness in our country is because of this vast disparity in who has access to the American dream. We now have, under President Biden, this historic policy of reindustrializing America. We're using AI, software, new technology to say we want to bring back modern steel, modern aluminum, shipbuilding. We should never have allowed China to eat our lunch in industrialization. We're going to be the manufacturing superpower. But to do this well and to overcome the economic divides, we need to make sure that every district in this country is participating. And that means that every community needs to participate, including and most particularly the Black and Latino community. Here's why it's so important. When we have manufacturing that is being done in the Black and Latino community, those folks will be able to invest in the local economy, to build wealth, to create high-paying jobs, to help improve home ownership, which is the biggest pathway to wealth for the middle class, and to help lift up their communities to participate in the modern economy. Now, this report, and you'll hear about it in detail, does a lot, but it makes some very practical suggestions. One I've already alluded to. By listing the actual businesses, we know who we can outreach to. This is a simple thing to do. Like, our federal government should be more intentional about actually outreaching to the talent that exists. Second, and this is a problem across the procurement of the federal government, we need to realize that not everyone can do the big contracts. Not everyone can have a staff that can bid on multi-billion or multi-$100 million contracts. So the report recommends that some of these contracts for the federal government be a smaller size so that we can make room for minority manufacturing businesses. Third, it says we've got to streamline some of the regulatory process. I mean, it is too hard to build things in America, period. But it is also too hard to apply for a grant or to get business with the federal government. Too many people say, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't have a bunch of K Street lawyers, lobbyists working for me. And the recommendations the report makes of streamlining that is very, very important so that we can get more people participating. And finally, I think the report is important in saying we need more resources and investment in technology, in STEM, and in helping Black and Latino small businesses get the resources they need to be competitive in these fields. Let me end with this point. This is not just about overcoming the racial wealth gap. This is not just about figuring out how we have economic prosperity and an access to the American dream in too many parts of the country that have been left out. This is about American preeminence. This is about American leadership in the 21st century. We're competing with 1 billion people in China. We simply do not have the luxury of leaving any person off the field. We need everyone in this country. We need all communities, Black and brown, white, men, women, gay, straight. We need everyone. That is our advantage, unlike other societies that are more homogenous. If we do this, if we can get all of the talent participating, I believe we can have an industrial renaissance in this country. I believe we can bring back a lot of the industry that was lost and that we can start to provide modern wealth opportunities to communities that have been left out. So I just want to commend ICIC for giving us the roadmap, the North Star of where we want to go. And I look forward to working with everyone here in the years ahead to implement it.
Thank you, Ro. And now let's please welcome CEO and President of NMSDC, Ying McGuire. Ying?
Well, thank you, Steve. I want to start out by thanking everyone at ICIC for conducting this important research and hosting the webinar to share the key takeaways. And thank you, Steve, for your visionary leadership and also continued partnership with the NMSDC. And I want to also thank Congressman Ro Khanna for not only joining us today, but for all your work to help pass once in a generation economic policies like Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, like CHIPS and Science Act and Inflation Reduction Act that are not only helping us build the infrastructure and the technology of the future, but also provide immense opportunities for the minority business community that we serve. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We have almost 100 people with us on this Monday afternoon. And some of you, I see your NMSDC friends already, and other great to meet you all for the first time, since a lot of you not from the NMSDC community not yet. I want to quickly share who we are, what we do. In 1972, amid the civil rights movement, President Nixon's executive order aimed at the racial equity really laid groundwork for what is now NMSDC. It's really a catalyst for economic justice, pioneering opportunities in the corporate supply chain for the systemically excluded communities of color, Asian Indian, Asian Pacific, Black, Hispanic, and Native American. And today, NMSDC's network comprises 23 affiliate councils, boots on the ground across the US, 10 international partners, 1,500 great corporate members, 1,700 certified MBEs, and many, many strategic partners like ICIC. And our impact really extends beyond the corporate supply chain, addressing disparities in wealth building opportunities and really reshaping the American economic landscape. So our larger mission is to build long-lasting generational wealth for the community of color we serve. I share this not just to give you more context on NMSDC, but to demonstrate how important this report is to our work. Speaking of reports, Steve knows that NMSDC also recently released our annual Minority Business Economic Impact Report. And some of the key takeaways from that report directly pertain to the Black and Hispanic, and as well as Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native American business community. Our Black and Hispanic businesses both saw double-digit percentage increase in revenue, with Hispanic businesses experiencing 50% increase in revenue from 2022 to 2023, and AAPI community showing a strong performance, although the growth rate has slowed down. However, at the same time, the amount of business revenue coming from manufacturing industry from all these four groups decreased. As we will learn today, this is in line with the findings from ICIC's report that Hispanic and Black businesses are severely underrepresented in the manufacturing supply chain. Furthermore, as the ICIC report also highlights, Black and Hispanic-owned firms, they're job creators for their communities. If we're going to advance a more inclusive economy and build long-lasting wealth for these communities, it is imperative that we increase their representation in the manufacturing industry as a part of the national strategy to invest into America's own supply chain. We absolutely need a strategic and comprehensive approach to advance Black and Hispanic businesses in the manufacturing sector by fostering the expansion of a interconnected ecosystem that includes U.S. corporations, many of them are corporate members, capital providers, stakeholders in the academic institutions, entrepreneurs, and policymakers like Representative Khanna. I believe reports like this, this one we're discussing today, are a key element that approach. Many of the recommendations you're going to hear about today align perfectly with the work that we're doing at NMSDC to accelerate growth of our certified MBEs. And I'm excited to use today's learning to really enhance the growth of our Hispanic and Black MBEs in the manufacturing industry, especially those in the emerging industries like clean energy and AI, primed for greater MBE involvement. Before I conclude my opening remarks, I want to invite you all to continue the conversation we're having today by joining us at NMSDC's annual conference and exchange in Atlanta from October 20th to 23rd. And when I first joined NMSDC as a CEO, as the first Asian American leader, in recognition of the fact that more was needed to increase MBE's representation in the US economy, we set I call it a BHAG goal, big, hairy, audacious goal, to reach $1 trillion in annual revenue for NMSDC certified MBEs. While we have made some amazing progress in the past couple of years, annual revenue reached $363 billion in 2023. But if we're going to close the racial wealth gap, we need to go faster. So therefore, the $1 trillion goal is our North Star. We must increase the representation of MBEs in the manufacturing industry by seizing this moment. And as we continue today's discussion, I encourage all of you to consider how you can contribute to this mission as we work towards building the more inclusive and agile manufacturing ecosystem that's needed to achieve our shared vision. And Steve, I hand that back to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ying. Well, Howard Wial and his colleagues, Miles Chandler and Peter Eberhard, could not have done better than to have had Ro Khanna and Ying McGuire as their partners every step of the way. So let's turn it over to our research director, Dr. Howard Wial, to hear about the report, the recommendations, and what we can do actionably to move this agenda forward at an accelerating rate. Please welcome Howard Wial.
Thank you, Steve. The CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act promise enormous benefits for U.S. manufacturing and for the entire U.S. economy. Next slide. We wrote our report out of a concern for whether those benefits would also flow to Black and Hispanic communities, and in particular to Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers. Our work is urgent because the nearly $1.5 trillion that the three laws together authorize is already beginning to be spent. So now is the time to ensure that it's going to be spent in a racially inclusive manner. The three laws do have some social equity provisions, but their ability to deliver racially equitable outcomes will depend largely, at least in the short term, on their ability to benefit existing Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers. Those existing manufacturers are the subject of the report. Next slide. We examined Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers in 13 key supply chains supported by one or more of the three laws. We wanted to find out how many of those manufacturers there are and how their sizes and their geographic locations compare with those of white-owned manufacturers in the same supply chains. And we also wanted, of course, to develop policy recommendations to address any disparities we found. Next slide. We chose to focus on 13 supply chains based on a combination of their policy importance, their inclusion of both newer and older technologies, and the technical feasibility of conducting research on them. This slide shows the 13. which are often featured in discussions of these three laws. Next slide. We examined privately held Black and Hispanic-owned original equipment manufacturers and first-tier suppliers. Privately held companies are the only ones for which it's possible to identify owners' race and ethnicity. Original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, are the companies, usually large but not always, that assemble and sell final products. First-tier suppliers manufacture components and sell them to the OEMs. Most manufacturing supply chains also include lower-tier suppliers, but it's very difficult to identify them for a nationwide multi-industry report such as ours. So we consider only OEMs and first-tier suppliers. We obtained our data from Dun & Bradstreet's business database and from NMSDC's database on its certified minority-owned companies. And once again, we're grateful to NMSDC for providing us with that information. Using those data, we then undertook a lengthy process of looking up the owner's race and ethnicity and the products of each company to determine which companies were Black or Hispanic owned, which supply chains they belonged in, and whether they were OEMs or first-tier suppliers. And for comparison, we also used a sample of white-owned companies. Next slide. The report has three major findings. First, Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers are highly underrepresented in every supply chain that we looked at. Out of about 20,000 OEMs and first-tier suppliers in the 13 supply chains, only 107 are Black-owned. That's 0.5% of the total. And only 151 are Hispanic-owned. That's 0.8% of the total. There's some variation among supply chains, but the percentages for every supply chain are all under 2%. Well below Black and Hispanic people's percentages of the US population and even of all business owners. Next, Black and Hispanic-owned companies are not at a disadvantage in terms of size in these supply chains. In fact, they're actually bigger than their white-owned counterparts, although all are still very small. Their median employment, regardless of the race or ethnicity of the owner, is still under 20 employees. Finally, Black and Hispanic-owned companies are located in the same places as white-owned ones, so they're not disadvantaged in terms of their proximity to large OEMs or R&D centers. Regardless of race or ethnicity, manufacturers in our 13 supply chains are located mostly in the major manufacturing centers of the Midwest, the Mid-South, Texas, and California. Next slide. Our policy recommendations are designed to increase Black and Hispanic representation because that's where the disadvantage is. We developed recommendations in 6 priority areas. I'd encourage you to read the report to see all the recommendations. For the sake of time, I'll just highlight one specific recommendation in each area. Next slide. Our first priority area is to increase capital access for Black and Hispanic-owned businesses. And here, one of our recommendations is to encourage those manufacturers to use supply chain finance. In supply chain finance, finance companies smooth the flow of funds to suppliers by buying their receivables. That gives the suppliers a stable flow of funds against which they can borrow to maintain and expand their operations. Next slide. Our second priority area is to expand technical assistance and training for minority-owned manufacturers. For example, we recommend that procurement technical assistance providers develop the ability to help small manufacturers bid on contracts with large OEMs and large first-tier suppliers. Currently, the federally funded Apex Accelerators Network helps companies understand how to bid on government contracts, but it doesn't cover contracts with large private companies. To be able to assist companies with private sector procurement, technical assistance providers will need additional funding, and they'll also need to cooperate with large private companies to understand how their procurement systems work. Next slide. Many people don't think about graduate STEM education as a source of entrepreneurs in advanced manufacturing, but it is. Our third priority area is to expand Black and Hispanic students' access to and ability to graduate from those kinds of educational programs. For example, we recommend increasing government funding for STEM graduate education at historically Black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions. Next slide. We have a variety of recommendations to reform the procurement practices of OEMs and other large purchasers. Here, CHIPS Act funding provides a model. Semiconductor manufacturers receive preference for that funding if their bids include specific and actionable supplier diversity plans. That requirement for supplier diversity plans should be extended to all federal, state, and local supported manufacturers in supply chains covered by industrial policy legislation. Next slide. We have a set of recommendations to improve the provision of data on manufacturing supply chains and their demographics. Currently, there are important but disconnected supply chain mapping efforts underway at the Department of Energy and the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the Department of Commerce. Federal statistical agencies are well positioned to coordinate and expand on those efforts and ensure that they include information on business owners' demographics. Next slide. Finally, Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers may have more opportunities to benefit from federal industrial policy legislation if they operate at lower tiers of their supply chains. One of our other findings is that in most supply chains, there are more Black and Hispanic-owned first-tier suppliers than OEMs, and that suggests that perhaps there could be even more Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers at lower tiers of supply chains, which we weren't able to cover in this report. Next slide. We conclude with a call to action. We call on industry leaders, policymakers, and stakeholders to embrace our recommendations and join the movement toward a more equitable manufacturing sector. This initiative not only addresses racial disparities, but also unlocks potential for economic prosperity that is both inclusive and sustainable. That's a summary of our report, and I'll now turn the floor over to Susan Helper to moderate the roundtable portion of our webinar.
And let me just say, in welcoming Susan Helper and Ro and Ying back, Howard, you have set the table. You have laid out a series of actionable steps in which we can all participate. So let's hear a dynamic conversation about actionable steps that can be taken by some of America's most significant leaders. Susan Helper again, Carleton Professor of Economics at Case Western Reserve, the Weatherford School of Management, former Senior Advisor at OMB. Nobody is better equipped to facilitate this discussion. Susan Helper, take it away.
Thank you. This is really honored to be moderating this panel of all-stars. And given the limited time, I wanted to just jump right in to the first two questions and combine them. Basically, kind of why are we doing this? What is the benefit of having minority-owned businesses, both to minority communities and then also to supply chains more generally? And maybe turn to Congressman Khanna first to give you the first, if you would like.
Well, I appreciate that. As I said in some of my opening remarks, the biggest beneficiary or advantage is the wealth generation. I mean, the reality is that advanced manufacturing has a multiplier effect with jobs. It disproportionately creates good paying jobs. It disproportionately creates wealth, especially when combined with technology. And if you just have a highly service-oriented economy, you're not going to have the same opportunities for wealth generation or good paying jobs. So for many minority communities, this is critical to start to have greater economic strength. And the second point is that we need, as a country, we're lacking sufficient talent in STEM, in engineering, in manufacturing. And so we have so many talented folks who aren't getting the opportunities or the training. And if we can include a larger population and excluded communities, then that's going to enrich our ability to industrialize.
Thank you. And actually, one of the things the report does is cite some research finding that minority-owned businesses, in fact, do this. It's significantly more able to find talent from minority communities than white-owned businesses. So maybe I'll turn now to Ms. McGuire to add on benefits. And maybe I've just ask you to talk specifically about some benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. before I go answer your question, I want to encourage everyone go read the report because Howard just give you a summary. I actually this weekend with a glass of wine, I read through cover to cover and lots of amazing informations for the MBE. I see some of our MBEs on the call. You even want to read the appendix because in there has explanation of each law and what are the tier 1 opportunities. So it's really great information. So Sue, sorry, I had to sidetrack a little bit. So you asked me, how do Black Hispanic-owned manufacturer benefit our community? They actually build direct wealth for the community of color, whether that is by hiring Black and Hispanic workers, or giving back to the community through philanthropy. For NMSDC certified MBEs, more than 60% of their employees are people of color. And also, minority-owned businesses are more likely to do business with other Black and Hispanic businesses, which helps create even a more vibrant and a thriving business ecosystem. And because we encourage our certified MBEs to really work together, whether it is a customer-vendor relationship or strategic partnership or joint venture partners, and they truly created jobs within minority communities. And the other thing, we observed the Black and Hispanic-owned manufacturers are more likely to invest in their local community. I've seen them build the schools and the infrastructure and provide community services. And they also serve as a great role model and a source of inspiration for young people of color in our community, and then showing them that entrepreneurship is really a viable path that can build generational wealth for the community of color. And some of them, and once they become successful, they actually start to help pave the way for greater access to capital. Many of them formed investment fund and start to provide financial services to other minority entrepreneurs. So in a nutshell, they really play a crucial role in driving both economic, social, and cultural benefits with our communities.
Great, thank you so much. And I guess I might call on myself and note that one of the cool things about the report that Howard did, as the Congressman mentioned, is to find these are actual manufacturers. That sometimes there's a desire, and one way to meet particularly government procurement requirements is you can go to resellers. So these are in some sense, people buying things from China and reselling. And so that's sort of undercutting other US manufacturers, not necessarily any advantage of scale, any hiring, very much hiring, et cetera. And so I think these are real manufacturers with real chances to benefit both minority communities through jobs, and then the supply chains that they're part of through increased scale, et cetera. So just a lot of untapped, leaving a lot of people off the field here. So maybe now we might turn to solutions. One of the barriers that these manufacturers face is, because of past discrimination, lower wealth. So they have less collateral that allows them to be attractive lending targets for banks, et cetera. Other kinds of barriers they face. We've mentioned a bunch of solutions already. Are there some that either we particularly think should be emphasized that Howard mentioned, or others that have not been mentioned yet? Just either one of those. And maybe this time I'll go with Ms. McGuire first.
Thank you, Sue. Before we talk about solution, we need to talk about barriers. Howard mentioned number one, he's talking about increased capital access, and that's a real barrier. One of the challenges faced by our businesses is the lack of capital available for minority business owners. Some of the statistics out there, for example, Black-owned companies attract only about 1% of a VC funding, despite that they make up 14% of the US population, like Congressman Khanna mentioned. I was at Stanford when they released this year's study on Latino business, a state of Latino-owned businesses, and the odds of loan approval from national banks to Latino-owned businesses, they're 60% lower for Latino-owned businesses, and they receive less than 2% of available VC funding in the US. So it is a real issue. And so the solution, I'm going to only talk about solutions that from NMSDC. A few decades ago, NMSDC established an affiliate called Business Consortium Fund. It's a CDFI. And the CDFI Business Consortium Fund, BCF, is providing loan to our more MBE at the beginning phase of their journey, and we know that although it helped, but it's just not enough for our MBEs to scale, especially in the manufacturing space, require heavy investment on equipment and capex investment in people. And so we're attempting to address in several ways. For example, last year with the support of Barclay, we established the Capital Manager Program aimed at increasing the number of minority-owned and minority-focused equity firms. As a part of this program, we actually launched the most comprehensive database of capital firms with either a ethnic minority founder and or firms that focus on minority business ecosystem, which is currently available on NMSDC website for you to check it out. We also had to revamp our certification process and the criteria, because we realized by defining 51% ownership, we actually intentionally were blocking MBEs from gaining access to equity capital. So therefore, we introduced a growth initiative that allow our minority businesses to drop ownership as low as 25%, as long as they demonstrate this minority controlled and owned. We call it MCC, minority controlled companies. So they really allow them to gain more access to private equity capital while still maintaining the MBE controlled certification. So many examples, but before I go further, I'll hand over to Congressman Khanna to share some of your solutions.
Well, I think we have to be very explicit about a defense of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and an understanding that this very concept is under assault in our democracy. Now, the reason that it's under assault is sometimes people feel, well, there's been progress made on racial equality, and why are you putting me on the defensive? Obviously, this country has made tremendous progress from the 1960s, 1970s to now. Can't you acknowledge that? Of course we can acknowledge that. Of course the country today on issues of race and gender is much better than the country was in the 1960s. But one can have that thought that we are improving and still recognize that as a legacy of 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow, you had communities that were excluded from modern wealth generation and opportunity, and being intentional in providing them some capital and opportunity is actually going to make this country stronger, and is not putting people on the defensive, but is continuing the march to progress. I am proud of ICIC for having the courage to put out a report like this in this political climate, but we need to make the philosophical case clearly, loudly, and strongly, because a lot of the programs to be effective are going to require pushing back against this assault on DEI.
And Sue, if I may, I want to kind of build on what the Congressman just said, and I absolutely agree that all of us need to have a courage to push back on the assault on DEI. And last Monday, the White House convened a historic union of our nation's top civil rights voices and the diverse business organization, NGO leaders like NMSDC, and with our corporate partners. And we all demonstrate our commitment to minority business development, the overall DEI, and we share the best practices. And you can all check out the White House website for the announcement on that event. And the bottom line is our nation's global competitiveness really depending on having all hands on deck and really fully engage the talents of our individuals. We don't have enough talent, not to mention that people we serve are going to become the new majority of America. And so we need to leverage these talent, and whether it's minority, women, LGBTQ, people, veteran, those with disabilities, all other underserved group, to really unlock our country's complete economic potential. So Congressman, I completely agree with you. That's a front and center of our work these days, and love to look for a partnership with you on the policy and advocacy.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, I mean, I think you both have powerfully spoken about the legacy of 250 years of slavery, et cetera, and just kind of thinking about what are the problems, the barriers that creates, and make sure we have solutions to those barriers. So it seems like one is lack of wealth to serve as collateral. Another is exclusion from networks that would, give people the skill and understanding about how you participate in some of these networks. What does it take to prepare a bid package for whether it's the Department of Defense or Ford Motor Company? Are there other kinds of barriers that we need to be particularly attentive to in our solutions that you guys would point to, and or the kinds of solutions, mentoring, et cetera, that we might particularly think of as important in addition to the ones already mentioned?
I would say there are two things. I mean, one is just a matter of resources. I mean, if you take the entire historically Black colleges and university network, about 100 of them, which produced John Lewis, Martin Luther King, the entire endowment is $5 billion of all of the HBCUs. The endowment of Stanford, near my district, is about $30 billion. So Stanford has 6 times the endowment of all of the HBCUs combined. And obviously that's going to make a difference in STEM and in investment. And why is this? Because there have been a lot of graduates of Stanford who go out and make a lot of money, and they give the money to Stanford. I have nothing wrong with that. I'm sure I'll give my alma mater money, although there are other causes I think that they could go than just giving universities money. But nothing wrong with that. But the point is we have to recognize the disparity in the resources and have to be willing to address that to get new talent. And then your point about networks. I mean, I used to teach economics at Stanford. I used to joke my students got funded before they had an idea. They because they know the right person at Kleiner or Sequoia, they email and they get coffee, and they were adept at knowing how to be just agreeable enough to a multi-billionaire. You ask them, tell me how you made your money, and let them talk for 15, 20 minutes and ingratiate themselves. And, they learn all those skills at a place like Stanford. And then you go to historically Black colleges or universities or HSIs, and they have the hardest working folks, and they have no shot at getting the funding because they don't have the networks. I'm doing a summit on September 30th, Steve Grossman, I will be representing ICIC there, where we get 40 historically Black colleges and just getting Microsoft, Apple, other companies, so they start to have the networks. So I think there's structural issues that this report gets to that need to be addressed.
And I absolutely agree with Congressman Khanna's comment that lack of access to relationships, access to resource, access to opportunities is a huge hurdle. And that's why we exist at NMSDC. Besides certifying minority-owned businesses, a big part of what we and the 23 affiliates do are to provide access. We put together lots of, we call it word of matchmaker. We match MBEs with relationships, opportunity, and capital, all of that. But in the procurement practice, one of the barriers are mindset barriers. And so when you talk to whether it's government agency or large company buyers, and the mindset has been that minority-owned businesses, Black and Hispanic-owned businesses, not scalable. But the fact is, we have MBEs can do global contract any time of the day, and we have MBEs on mid-sized, large-sized businesses. They're not looking hard enough. The mindset barrier is preventing them from seeing these, willing, ready, able, scalable MBE ready to be tier one suppliers to government contracting and corporate contracting. So I think sometimes the mindset is the hardest thing to change.
That's great. And I think one thing that's great about manufacturing is that there's a supply chain structure that happens, so that there are big customers, a few big customers. You change the mindset at those few big customers and do some of the technical assistance that you guys all provide, and you could imagine actually helping these companies scale. So I know the Congressman needs to leave, and wanted to allow Steve to thank you for your excellent, wonderful participation, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Ro and Ying, we're delighted. Ying, I hope you can stay till the end. We've just got a little less than 10 minutes left. Ro, we know you've got to go. Ro Khanna, in case you all don't know it, is really one of the principal architects of America's new industrial transformation. You go back to his website, you can learn about what he has done over an extended period of time. There's a lot more that you're going to learn about Ro Khanna in the months and years ahead. And Ro, we are profoundly grateful to you for playing this leadership role, not only today, but in your entire career. So with that, let me kick this back to Sue. I know we've got a bunch of Q questions from the audience, and I know we can handle a number of them before we get to the end. Sue?
Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Let's see. We've got time for a couple questions. Let me turn to Dan Swinney, who wants to talk about how we turn the crisis created by the retirement of the baby boom generation in manufacturing companies without a successor. And I know, Dan, that you've been doing some work on this.
Okay. Well, I'll just say there's a generational a departure of the baby boom generation for all aspects of manufacturing. And that includes ownership of manufacturing companies. So as it's been cited before, only 1% of manufacturing companies are owned by, but only 1% of companies are owned by, Black and Latino entrepreneurs. With the lack of successors, and recently the Great Cities Institute at University of Illinois found that 60% of small companies have no succession plan or no successor in place. This is a crisis, which means in the next 3 to 5 years, thousands of companies will close because of that problem. That represents a huge opportunity for employees as well as Black and Latino entrepreneurs to buy those companies and really dramatically increase the number of companies that are owned. And my question to the panelists are, what can be done to promote that kind of approach?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Dan. If I had a perfect answer for it, I will be, solve the world hunger problem. So I think earlier we talked about the STEM education. When I was with the Corporate America, I participated in this whole outsourcing manufacturing overseas. Mm-hmm. We went from making, I was with Dell Technologies, we went from making everything here. And for cost saving reasons, we just moved everything overseas. We didn't even have a hybrid model, and we didn't think through the strategic implications, long-term implication for our supply chain and also for our country. And so that was the wave of cost saving, movement, and it made us to outsource everything. overseas. And hindsight, we should have thought about hybrid model, keep some in the country so that the skill set remains. Years later, when we tried to pull back, we couldn't even find type of skill set we need to restore the manufacturing, because the education changed, because the outsource movement, our education system, what they focus on, become very different. The technical education, vocational college became less important than four-year colleges. So I think we have to change the whole education system. Some of the vocational education is going to be very important, teaches very technical capabilities to make sure we have a workforce to be able to take on this industrial manufacturing work. I remember I served on the U.S. Investment Advisory Council under Secretary Pritzker, and we were working on attracting foreign direct investment, and we were successful bringing in foreign company to come to this country to build manufacturing. And what their complaint to us was, well, I can't find the kind of workers that I'm looking for. Like, you all don't have those skill sets.
Stop there, and just because, and we have about 2 minutes left, and wanted to note that a couple of things. One is, I think, also just kind of getting people to have the idea that they could actually run a business and creating networks of those people. And I think Dan probably can put in the chat some of the things that he's done on that. I did want to bring in John Alec and his point about maybe you could say 30 seconds about what it might take for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, John, to focus more on Black and Hispanic manufacturing firms and what they might be able to do.
Well, I think, first of all, the MEP program needs about 10 times the budget it has today, and building that budget is a political task. It has to take place in Washington. You already have MEPs in 50 states. You need to get more of the Congress members knowledgeable about what they do, and then push the individual centers through their local leadership to give more support to minority businesses.
Great. No, it seems like a lot of it is we've got to get all of our resources toward manufacturing to be increased, and then particularly develop them toward these Hispanic and Black-owned businesses. Really grateful for all the questions. There's a lot of wonderful information in the chat, and I know there'll be some follow-up to people who had questions that we didn't get to. But I wanted to turn it back to Steve Grossman to close us out, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, Sue, thank you so much for mentioning that at the end, because we will follow up. There are a lot of exciting ideas in the chat. We will flesh those out a little bit. Just a lot of appreciation. Thank Ro, Ying, thank you as well. I want to note that ICIC's actionable steps following up on this report is to create literally a manufacturing cohort. We will be doing a pilot in early 2025, and I'm thrilled that Ying and NMSDC will be partnering with us, and we're going to encourage and invite in diverse manufacturers into that process to provide education, technical assistance, one-on-one coaching, access to capital, because the best way we know how to do that is to create a sustainable ecosystem in every major center of population where there are manufacturing companies. Howard's research is the foundation for that. Everything we do at ICIC is research-based. So once Howard's research is done, then we take that and we actually make it practical. But the pilot, you'll learn more about it early next year. Thanks, Ying, for being a partner. Thanks to Susan Helper. What a wonderful career you continue to have academically in terms of government. Thanks to Howard, to Miles, to Peter, and to Sarah Ganan and Jasmine Martin. And thanks to the participants. You're the ones who made this a success. The actionable steps that you're going to help us take is what's critical here. Let's join together. You'll hear more from us. This is the first of many conversations. Grateful for your participation. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much.